Geoengineering refers to a set of emerging technologies that could manipulate the environment and partially offset some of the impacts of climate change. Certain technologies are actually being proposed by geoengineer scientists as a potential advancement for geoengineering. One of the technologies to be used for geoengineering is cloud seeding. In a smart chart, it briefly explains how cloud seeding
Extreme heat has been deadly in the Middle East during one of the holiest times of the year for Muslims. The State Department says multiple U.S. citizens died during the Hajj pilgrimage to Mecca this week. Egypt just announced more than 1,000 people have died. There's still a large number of unregistered pilgrims that are unaccounted for. Saudi Arabia has yet to release official figures. It, of course, is not the only place dealing with wild weather. From Hurricane Sandy to the Alberta floods, we're seeing more examples of extreme weather.
In the United States, authorities have warned of epic amounts of rainfall as Florence, now a tropical depression, continues to cross the Carolinas.
Now, this first portion of the radar cycle, fairly bland and typical, but then you see these bands of very distinct cloud cover moving into the region. That is not rain, that is not snow. Believe it or not, military aircraft flying through the region is dropping chaff.
To the growing danger in the Philippines, authorities are now warning that an active volcano could possibly erupt again.
This was the deadliest tornado outbreak in the U.S.
A 6.4 earthquake and multiple aftershocks.
Small bits of aluminum, sometimes it's made of plastic or even metallicized paper products, but it's used as an anti-radar issue, and obviously they're up there practicing. Now, they won't confirm that, but I was in the Marine Corps for many years, and I'll tell you right now, but that's what it is.
We all have heard about the news stories and articles about very extreme weather events happening all around the world. Most of these news articles blame only on man-made global warming or climate change for the root causes of these natural disasters. We are told by so-called scientific experts that carbon dioxide, or our carbon footprint, is the leading factor for Category 5 hurricanes, for massive heat waves, for extreme wildfires, or for constant rainfall. However, this is further from the truth. What if I told you that there was something else contributing into the creation of these natural disasters? Something that is vastly observable, but yet so hidden from the public. For example, when was the last time you've seen a natural cloud? You know what I'm talking about, a roundish, puffy cloud. When was the last time you've seen natural skies? When was the last time you've ever experienced natural weather? We all have asked ourselves this one question: what is wrong with our weather or with the weather?
But first, the question we get asked the most: just how bad will this winter be?
Well, in this 7-chapter documentary, I will show you, and I will answer this question by exposing a reality so great about weather modification or weather manipulation. We will expose who's behind it, why are they doing it, for what purpose, and how it's being done. On that note, let us begin our journey in exposing weather modification.
We shall propose further cooperative effort between all the nations in weather prediction and eventually in weather control. We must, for example, balance the gains of weather modification against the hazards of protracted drought or storm.
Lasers? Really? To change the weather?
That's right. Well, as Mark Twain once famously said, everyone complains about the weather, but no one ever does anything about it. Well, instead of doing a rain dance, we physicists are firing trillion-watt lasers into the sky to actually precipitate rain clouds and actually bring down lightning bolts. This is potentially a game changer.
This is the foundation for the development of a weather satellite that will permit man to determine the world's cloud layer and ultimately to control the weather, and he who controls the weather will control the world.
Even in the 60s, the CIA used this to bring down monsoons during the Vietnam War to wash out the Viet Cong. Governments have been playing with this thing.
Alleged to.
Alleged to, right.
Yeah.
Now, we realize that for decades now, these governments have been alleged to have experimented with weather control, but nothing conclusive. However, for floods, for agriculture, farmers, for people planning wedding parties, football games, you name it, outdoor events and agriculture and flooding and even hurricanes, all of them could be subject to weather modification.
For as science investigates the natural environment, it also modifies it. And that modification may have incalculable consequences for evil as well as for good.
A man by the name Thomas Frey, an American futurist and celebrity speaker, once stated, "He who controls the weather will control the world. He who controls gravity will control the universe. He who controls time will never be around." In terms of having the ability to control gravity or time is something more abstract to imagine than having the ability to control the Earth's natural weather. Weather control, also known as climate control, also known as weather modification, is the act of intentionally manipulating or altering the weather. This is a topic I've been wanting to investigate more ever since I woke up to the reality of HAARP, which simply stands for High Frequency Active Aurora Research Program, and on the chemtrail phenomenon. Knowing from the research I've conducted, it is no surprise to me that those who sit behind closed doors, who control our banking systems, who control the mainstream media, and for the most part the whole world, would hold such capabilities and techniques to control the weather. So put on your seatbelts as we uncover the truth, purposes, the origins, and more behind weather modification. Many people to this very day believe and state that weather modification didn't start into the late 1900s, such as Project or Operation Popeye during the Vietnam War from 1967 to 1972, where the US government and its CIA used chemicals that would be shot out by aircraft to intentionally induce rain to slow down the soldiers from Vietnam in an attempt to extend the monsoon season. Many go on to say weather modification didn't start till after World War II. Surprisingly, weather control actually goes back to the early 1900s, way before aircraft were even being used to seed clouds. For example, James Pollard, SB, a U.S. meteorologist born in Westmoreland County from May 9, 1785 and died later around January 24, 1860, proposed the idea that burning forests may have the capacity to increase rain. The science behind his bold theory goes like so. Storms could be proposed by large fires making local disturbances in the equilibrium of temperature, which would ascend currents of cloud and rain. Although James Pollard's theory on weather control made him famous for his nickname Storm King and the invention of the first ever national weather forecasting, his theory was never put into experimentation. His suggestions to Congress on experimentation of his bold theory led him to rejections due to the absurdity of the idea of purposely creating wildfires to supposedly induce rain. Some of his critics go on to say, did not fear SB's plan would fail, but that it would succeed, placing the power of rainfall into the hands of the federal government. It was clear also that in the 19th century, many people believed that creating a storm could be done by the use of bells, fireworks, and loud sounds. When the Erie Canal was completed in 1825, thousands of revelers congregated along its path to celebrate the new waterway. The celebrations were loud, filled with church bells, firework cannons, etc., eventually leading up to storms that have entered the area along the new waterway. This event ever so slightly convinced those who were celebrating to believe they have summoned a storm. An American lawyer named Robert St. George Dyrenforth, who was the first ever known man to actually conduct weather control, carried out a series of experiments for the government, using violent explosions in Texas to condense water vapor into rain. He was nicknamed the Rainmaker, according to Timothy Egan in his 2006 book, The Worst Hard Time. During his lifetime, many European Americans were very dependent on agriculture and plant life. Due to major droughts, many Europeans began to develop an interest in rainmaking. The earliest attempts involved the concussion method, which was premised on the theory that gunpowder, explosions, triggered friction and generated nuclei to produce rain. Congress later appropriated funds to put this theory into practice. The task was given to Robert St. George Dyrenforth. His experimentations continued from 1891 in Sea Ranch, Andrews County to 1892 in San Antonio. These experimentations were first suggested by Edward Powers. In his book War and the Weather, Edward noted the effects cannons and loud noises had on the weather during war. One of the experiments involved balloons containing oxygen and hydrogen that would explode at a height of a mile or more. This was then followed by the firing of charges of dynamite attached to kites and of blasting powder scattered over a wide area on the ground. Torrential rain would immediately occur. Many more experiments were conducted during different weather conditions as well as elsewhere around the 1890s by several other men. Davenport, on the other hand, never had any success in rainmaking, even though he had done exactly what he had read from War and the Weather. He later became known as Dry Henceforth due to the fact that he never made it rain in Texas. Charles William Post, an American inventor of the early 1900s, also conducted rainmaking with the use of the concussion method, as well as creating the first ever known cornflakes, grapes, and nuts. Due to his belief and readings of the concussion method, he soon started to do his own experiments. In 1910, he began by attaching 2 pounds of dynamite to a kite and fly it into the clouds and igniting it, later stating it was too dangerous. On the high elevations of the Cabrac Escarpment, he tried igniting 14-pound bundles of dynamite spaced 50 feet apart on the ground and set off at 10-minute intervals. From 1911 to 1914, Charles William executed rain battles, blasting over up to 24,000 pounds of explosives. Reportedly, he spent $50,000 on rain battles alone and claimed he enticed 7 showers from the sky in 13 attempts. Charles William Post is perhaps one of the most known men to actually conduct rain by the use of the concussion method, for he later predicted that rainmaking would one day replace irrigation. So it seems that in the past, many rainmakers were nicknamed for their insane ideas and bold theories to induce storms or precipitation. Many only did these experiments to help limit droughts and improve agriculture. However, as all of us know, certain experimentations could lead to consequences and dangerous side effects. For a brief example, Charles Maylor Hatfield, or the Moisture Accelerator, a nickname given to him, studied about ploviculture, which is simply a fancy word for rainmaking, made a deal with the city of San Diego in 1915 to help fight against the major droughts that were occurring there. He did so by producing rain with a supposed secret formula of chemicals, which he never revealed. Although Hatfield had known and studied ploviculture before his experimentations, the results that came were outstanding. As he precipitated rain, massive floods were steered along the city of San Diego, causing millions of dollars in damages. This perhaps was the ever first man-made natural disaster in history.
But Charlie had a contract to complete. Marina Reservoir was to be filled, so upon his tower he remained.
Hatfield continued to use his chemicals and to continue the evaporation process even when these rains stopped for approximately a week. Apparently, Marina Reservoir wasn't full at that point. The rain started again on January 24th, but it wasn't severe and people weren't too concerned. But it continued, and it rained on the 25th, and it rained tremendous amounts on the 26th. And people throughout San Diego County began to get very concerned because they hadn't really had a major recovery from the first storm.
Downtown San Diego records 2.19 inches of rain on January the 27th. But more importantly, San Diego River is 435 square miles. It goes all the way out to the backcountry mountains. And some of those areas, rainfalls on January 27th were 24 inches, 30 inches. And so an incredible volume of water comes down Mission Valley. 72,000 cubic feet per second, the biggest flood of the 20th century in San Diego.
Ever since rainmaking became a thing, many men began to develop and create machinery that would simulate the concussion method without the use of kites, balloons, or religious rituals. Machinery like the Steger vortex gun or hail cannons in 1902, which would cause a discharge of gas and set up vibrations into the clouds, causing rain.
Hail cannon firing off. It's pretty violent. Can't hardly hold the camera still.
coming up there. You can hear the plume flying up. Disrupt the cloud pattern.
This eventually leads us to the beginning of cloud seeding. It first began with FEDO, or Fog Investigation and Dispersal Operation, which was operated during World War II. The operation was meant to clear out fog from an airfield so that aircraft pilots may land safely. During the same time period, a gentleman named Vincent Joseph Schaefer, an American chemist and meteorologist, developed the concept of cloud seeding. He figured out that dumping dry ice into clouds could produce artificial snow or rain. He later developed silver iodide, which is a common chemical compound used today to seed clouds. In this next clip, you're going to see Schaefer's explanation on how cloud seeding works.
This is Vincent Schaefer speaking. I would like to take you into the laboratory and show you a few of the experiments that led us to our outdoor experiments in converting clouds into snow. Using a home freezing unit such as this, which has a temperature of around 0 Fahrenheit, we can form supercool clouds just like those in the natural atmosphere by breathing into the box. The moist air from the breath condenses and forms a cloud, and this cloud cools to a temperature of about 0 degrees Fahrenheit in a few seconds. Any moist thing placed in this box will produce such a cloud. By putting this cloud in the chamber, we can then do various things to it to see whether or not we can convert this supercool cloud to snow. This cloud is made up of liquid water droplets. They are not snow crystals as yet, but by taking a tiny piece of dry ice such as this and scratching it so a few tiny fragments fall into the supercool cloud, long streaks develop just like the vapor trail from an airplane. These contain millions and millions of tiny submicroscopic snow crystals which grow very fast and assume exactly the same forms that natural snowflakes show in an ordinary snowstorm. This is a picture of the first cloud that we seeded back last November. Flying in a small Fairchild plane and putting dry ice from a small dispenser in the bottom of the plane, we put about 6 pounds of dry ice into this 4-mile cloud, and within a very few minutes saw long streamers of snow falling from the base of the cloud and evaporating into the drier air below. Under many conditions, of course, full-fledged snowstorms will be produced in this way.
Vincent Schaefer wasn't the only man who conducted cloud seeding experiments. 2 other gentlemen were along his side, Bernard Vonnegut and Irving Lingmuir. Although cloud seeding seemed like an excellent creation to prevent droughts or wildfires, Lingmuir later stated, and I quote, "In the amount of energy liberated, the effect of 30 milligrams of silver iodide under optimum conditions equals that of 1 atomic bomb." As years went by, more men and women began to utilize the use of cloud seeding. Many were led to the idea of controlling hurricanes, wildfires, storms, and projects like Project Cirrus, Project Scud, Project Skyfire, Project Skywater, and many others. Much of these projects were conducted all over the United States of America. As a result to all of this, a video recorded around 1965, which originates from a TV show called Science and Engineering Television Journal, came forth with a couple of scientists to disclose how cloud seeding can be used to manipulate or control hurricanes and storms.
One of the most exciting developments in science today concerns the possibility that it may one day be possible to modify and perhaps even control weather and climate.
Walt Disney also created a film in 1959 called Eyes to Outer Space, where scientists go over how satellites and other technologies could be used to control the Earth's natural weather in the near future.
These future satellites will be the key to precise forecasting and control of weather.
The federal government, with the CIA, with the U.S. Navy and Air Force, later took over weather modification programs for their own intentions. This was the beginning of Project Storm Fury and National Modification Cumulus Project. The purpose of these projects was to see if it was possible to either dissipate a hurricane by the use of cloud seeding or increase rainfall and storms. After several experiments with cloud seeding, they figured out that weather control alone could serve as a weapon for war and that steering storms could be used for destroying land resources. This is true because during 1969 and 1970, the CIA was reported of ruining Cuba's sugar crops by the use of cloud seeding. This was originally disclosed by a gentleman named Lowell Pont. Lowell Pont claimed that the CIA's goal was to destabilize the weather in the Soviet Union and China to ruin harvests in order to create political unrest. Before these allegations, however, was Operation Popeye in 1967. Operation Popeye was sponsored by Henry Kissinger and CIA to seed clouds during the Vietnam War, causing landslides and an overdose of rainfall. This perhaps was the inception of weather warfare, which is simply the definition of the military interfering with or using weather modification for their own purposes, which of course could be for good or evil. Due to these violent uses of weather modification from the military and government, the Environmental Modification Convention later signed an international treaty in 1977 to ban weather warfare completely, prohibiting the military from using weather modification for hostile purposes. Nevertheless, Russians still had this technology in use, according to a report in 1979. NOAA also conducted an atmospheric modification program in 1980. Surprisingly, a Navy physicist and weather modification expert, Dr. Ben Livingston, actually briefed President Lyndon B. Johnson on the effectiveness of weather control back in the 1960s. Ben Livingston was involved in cloud seeding programs, such as Project Storm Fury and Operation Popeye. In an interview with Alex Jones, Ben Livingston exposes how the U.S. government has always wanted to have pure control of hurricanes. He also goes on to explain that Hurricane Katrina could have actually been greatly minimized by the use of cloud seeding, but was allowed to fully impact the Gulf states for political reasons. Sounds like treason to me, wink wink.
The results from the hurricane deluge experiment seemed so positive that many individuals believed the project should go operational, seeding major hurricanes that threaten land. A team of scientists at Stanford Research Institute at Stanford University did a decision analysis on all past seeding events, including the at the 1961 and 1963 experiments. Dr. James Madison of that group, reflecting their views, stated, "We claim they should consider seeding now if a big hurricane comes straight from Miami." These scientists said the government may have to accept responsibility for not seeding and thereby exposing the public to higher probabilities of severe storm damage and possible higher death tolls.
You can find the full interview in YouTube just by typing the father of weaponized weather in the search bar. You can also find it in a website called casecorner.wordpress.com. Even though the U.S. had officially banned weather warfare, weather modification was still a plausible solution to have a positive impact against storms, droughts, tornadoes, etc. In a National Weather Modification Policy Act in 1976, published by Congress, it states, weather modification technology has significant potential for preventing, diverting, or moderating the adverse effects of such disasters and hazards. This policy act helped escalate many more weather modification programs, which involved things like marine cloud brightening boats and new strategies to control the ionosphere, which led to the birth of HAARP. We will be covering HAARP later on as we continue to unfold who's behind weather control in today's era. You can find all the historic information, policy acts, technologies, and more about weather modification in his websites. Anyways, we will now be focusing our attention to the modern era of weather modification and expose it for what it is, and show you how weather warfare is now at full scale around us 24/7, and how our corrupted state of secret men have taken over weather modification programs, and show you their agenda for the use of such technologies. Now that we understand the origins and the history and the lore of weather modification, we can now start to unfold the current weather modification programs that are currently occurring and happening right in front of our eyes every day, 24/7 in the skies. So, we're going to be discussing about Geoengineering, specifically solar geoengineering, also known as stratospheric aerosol injection, or SAI. And I want to begin with David Keefe and Harvard University, because during 2015, David Keefe and Harvard University came out in public specifically talking about and disclosing what solar geoengineering is, which is briefly summarized in their own website, stating, and I quote, "Geoengineering refers to a set of emerging technologies that could manipulate the environment and partially offset some of the impacts of climate change. Certain technologies are actually being proposed by geoengineer scientists as a potential advancement for geoengineering. One of the technologies to be used for geoengineering is cloud seeding. In a smart chart, it briefly explains how cloud seeding works. And I will quote, "Silver iodide is released by a plane or ground-based generator. Silver iodide particles reach the targeted cloud. The silver iodide aids in the formation of ice crystals. The ice crystals become large enough to create snow." Another form of technology to be used for geoengineering is ocean iron fertilization, or aquatrails. It's basically the idea of dumping iron into the oceans, which will grow phytoplankton, which would capture CO2. Another form of technology to be used for geoengineering is marine cloud brightening boats. The strategy would be to spray salt water into the air to make marine clouds reflect more incoming solar radiation. As seen in this photo, they already have tested it out. A fourth proposal by geoengineers are space mirrors, which are self-explanatory. And finally, the one we have been waiting for, stratospheric aerosol injection, or SAI, which is described by a geoengineer named Alan Robach as, and I quote, "One suggested geoengineering response involves creating a cloud of particles in the stratosphere to reflect sunlight." According to Dr. Gernot Wignier, a co-director of Harvard's Solar Geoengineering Research Program, he claims that a hypothetical deployment program starting 15 years from now would be technically possible strictly from an engineering perspective. And according to Wake Smith, a study co-author at Yale, stated that no aircraft has the combination of altitude and payload capabilities required for stratospheric aerosol injection. In other words, geoengineering scientists claim they don't have the technology to do such a thing. And if they did, they would say they wouldn't know the outcomes or the consequences of using these geoengineering schemes via these technologies they propose to use.
My personal opinion is that we have to keep geoengineering on the table. We have to look at it very carefully because we might get desperate enough to want to use it. The danger, of course, with geoengineering is the one I was referring to a moment ago. We don't understand the system well enough to predict its responses in detail, and that means there's always a danger, if you try to engineer the system on a large scale, that you will do something that has side effects that are worse than the dimension of the problem you're trying to cure with the geoengineering in the first place. There are a variety of schemes that have been discussed for geoengineering. A classic example is injecting reflecting particles into Earth orbit that would deflect some of the sunlight that would otherwise be warming the Earth, and in that way try to produce a cooling effect to offset the heating effect of carbon dioxide and other greenhouse gases.
In addition, in an episode of the Colbert Report from Stephen Colbert, he interviews David Keefe specifically on solar geoengineering. What you're about to hear is perhaps one of the most vital information out there to this day, at least in my opinion, on geoengineering, coming from the man who is actually participating in this geoengineering program. Take a listen.
You could actually spray sulfuric acid in the stratosphere 20 kilometers over our head and use that to stop the planet warming up. And ugly tech things.
You can spray something into the atmosphere to change.
Spray pollution into the atmosphere to stop it warming.
How do you do this?
You start with a fleet of modified business jets and say 20,000 tons of sulfuric acid into the stratosphere every year. And each year you have to put a little more. And this doesn't, in the long run, mean that you can forget about cutting emissions. We will need to rein in.
No, we'll get to it eventually. meantime, we're shrouding the earth in sulfuric acid.
So people are terrified about talking about this because they're scared that it will prevent us cutting emissions.
Right, and also that it's sulfuric acid.
We put 50 million tons of sulfuric acid in the air now as pollution, and it kills 1 million people a year worldwide.
Okay, but it'll get better if we put more in.
We're talking about 1% of that.
1% more, we're just killing 10,000 more people.
You can do math.
What happens to the sulfuric acid after it's sprayed? Does it just stay up there?
No, it rains down, but it's a tiny addition to what we're already doing.
Is there any possible way this can come back to bite us in the end?
It actually turns out to be an old idea. This was known since President Johnson.
You ever look at those planes up there? They have contrails behind them. Maybe all those planes with the contrails, maybe they're actually spraying chemicals into the atmosphere right now, and Uncle Sam isn't telling us.
Seems extremely unlikely.
The fact that the United States is not telling something to its citizens, that seems extremely likely to me. I think they might have your idea already. So there you have it. They came out publicly talking about solar geoengineering, and nobody seemed to care. And still to this very day, there's posts everywhere, news articles of them saying, well, we might, experiment with geoengineering, or yes, we are experimenting, but you never know the consequences, etc., etc., etc. Even though we see a similar aspect of what they call stratospheric aerosol injection happening in our skies, almost on a daily basis, all you gotta do is peek at your window, look at the sky, and you'll begin to start noticing jets, whether it be commercial or military aircraft, spraying long-lasting lines that stretch from horizon to horizon, that linger into a hazy, milky, gray-looking sky and clouds. Nevertheless, these same stratospheric aerosol injections are actually chemtrails. If you don't know what chemtrails are, I would recommend reading a book from a guy named William Thomas, an author of his book, Chemtrails Confirm. In his book, he describes the differences of a chemtrail and a contrail, laying down all the facts of whether or not what we're seeing in the skies are actual chemical trails or condensation trails, with actual data from NASA and NOAA themselves. Surprisingly, William Thomas was actually the first man to popularize and promote the word chemtrails.
A chemical trail leaves a plume that stays in the sky for many hours, and chemtrails are rarely seen alone. What we most commonly see are X patterns, parallel rows, tic-tac-toe like grids in the sky, and of course airliners do not fly those kind of traffic patterns, particularly over rural areas where they're rarely seen. So chemical trails last a long time, and another giveaway is that if the sun is behind them, we often see a prismatic or rainbow effect in the sky through those chemical trails, indicating, scientists have told me, indicating the presence of chemicals in the air.
Stratospheric well-back seeding for reduction of global warming. A process to reflect infrared energy back into space. And this patent called for chemicals to be sprayed into the greenhouse gas layer, wait for this, 22,000 feet and higher. What were they going to spray? Oxides of metal. Which oxide? Aluminum oxide. Now you're saying, well, that's a heck of a lot of airplanes flying a lot of missions to spray that kind of material. So we turned to the United States Air Force, and you know what I found? They happen to own over 800 tanker aircraft, KC-135 and KC-10 aircraft. Exactly the planes that we have positively identified in hundreds of photographs and miles of videotape as the aircraft spraying these chemtrails.
You mentioned earlier that you're a pilot. Yeah, talk about chemtrails. We hear a lot about that. What are those, and are they for real?
Well, when you look into that, and ask questions, they say, oh yeah, contrails. No, contrails are behind a jet. If you see a jet flying very high, the stripe, the condensed stripe behind it, that's normal.
But in areas first observed where there's very little population, you see a jet airplane going. It's not only one, they have 4 condensed stripes behind them. They go this way, this way, this way, this way, and then this way, this way, this way, this way. And when you inquire about it, ask people. You recognize that the real climate change scientists are totally ticked off because apparently nobody really is asking them. It's the special interest, in my opinion, it's the oil industry, the energy industry that are blowing smoke up somebody's you-know-what and telling them that we have to lay a pattern up there to prevent sun energy from hitting Earth.